Hey everybody, this week I am joined by Zina Sarif, and she is CEO of Yendou. So obsessed with the possibility to cure cancer in her lifetime, Zina spent a decade in oncology research. Following a career in clinical research, most notably at AstraZeneca, she decided it was time to tackle the biggest blocker for medical innovation, clinical trial timelines, and founded Yendou. So Yendou is a clinical trial market network. It connects all stakeholders with the goal to break silos and streamline clinical operations. And their mission is speeding medical innovation towards a disease-free world. So Zina, welcome to the Healthtech podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, James, for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from today?
From Berlin, Germany. Saying hi from Germany.
Excellent. I'm not sure we've had many guests from Berlin in Germany, but yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. So Zina, listen, the way that we start these podcasts, obviously, is for you to tell your story. Now, you've obviously got an interesting career, moved into entrepreneurship. I've seen you lots on LinkedIn. You're nice and loud out there in the content world. So I've actually got a very good idea of what you're up to and what your challenges are and what you're looking for in the world. So I feel like I know you at this point, which is one of the values of content, I think. But yeah, it'd be great for you to tell us and all our listeners a bit about your story.
Thank you. It's always interesting because when people reach out to me on LinkedIn and then we will have our first Zoom call, it's always intimidating because I feel like they know more about me and I know nothing about them. and I'm always like, okay, could you please just start introducing yourself? So just like to have a sort of equilibrium and know a bit more. Yes, to me, I was born and I grew up in Morocco. Moved to Germany 15 years ago as a first immigrant to study chemistry. As you mentioned before, I am obsessed with the idea of curing cancer. And the reason why growing up in Morocco is I grew up in the capital, Rabat, and back then we used to have 2 oncology centers in the country. Once in the north of the country and once in the capital where I used to live. And I still remember the first time my uncle came to visit us and he would go to the hospital and he came back and he stayed with us for 6 months. And you could clearly see how within 6 months he went, like his health deteriorated from a healthy, fit person to being released to palliative care and dying a few months later. And I couldn't really understand. For me, it was the first time I got in the proximity of cancer and realizing, on the one hand, that most people cannot afford early diagnostics in the country. So it's most of the time when it's stage 4 metastatic and there is not much you can do. And because a lot of people, most Moroccans, they cannot afford stays in the hospital, so they always stayed with us. So my uncle was the first person who stayed at our place. And after him, there were many to come. To me, it was clear that just like understanding that becoming a doctor, like if you grow up in a low-income countries, your parents want you to have a career that is secure and ensure your financial security. And for them is, you either go to engineering school or to medical school. And so the idea was always, you got to become a doctor. And then me realizing, I truly still remember those conversations that doctors can't really save patients if there is no drugs out there to save them. And me telling my mom, I want to become a scientist and we will find cure. But then you just think about it naively, and my parents also think, I don't know, like dreams of tiny children. It stayed with me, honestly. And I don't know why, when I moved to university and I came to Germany, I studied chemistry. I have been good at I have been really good at physical chemistry and analytical chemistry, but I decided to study inorganic chemistry and drug design for chemotherapies. And people will always tell me, why are you taking the hard path? in doing so. And to me, it was like, you just want to study and do something that's meaningful for the world. So yeah, I spent 10 years literally in drug discovery, first chemotherapies development, then trying to lower the side effects. People like chemotherapies have heavy side effects that impact patients' quality of life. And it was always, how can we make them more precise, that actually they don't affect healthy cells in patients? And we have this new wave of CRISPR-Cas9 and personalized medicine. So I decided to study biology in addition to chemistry. Have been working on using CRISPR-Cas9 technologies and to personalize therapies in the space for years. And till one day I came across this one article, how it takes 12 years and it costs around 1 billion to deliver a therapeutic to patients. And to me, this is crazy, because if I spend 3 to 4 years doing preclinical research, testing toxicity of those therapeutics, testing them in animals, and it takes another 12 years to deliver the drug to the patients, so it's accessible to everyone. And if you think about it, it means that every therapy we have today in the market is a technology from the past. And the other thing is, because it costs around 1 billion, the way the drug we invest in, it's not the drug that has the highest potential to save lives, to improve the quality of life of patients, but it's the drug where I know for sure I have a high probability of it getting approved and to the market. And we can see it because 60% of therapeutics in clinical trials today get approved. And it shows how incremental innovations we do. Like today we have clinical trials in drug updates. We no longer do drug innovation. We literally do drug updates. You tweak a bit, you improve the receptor, you improve the affinity of the drug. And by that, for sure it's going to be approved. And the question becomes only how long who is the first in the market, basically. So for me, it was like, okay, it doesn't make any sense to stay in drug discovery. There's a lot of things happening. We are moving towards deep bio, where algorithms actually give us great predictions in terms of what other drugs we have to invest in. And the huge blocker will be clinical trials. And I decided to leave academia and drug discovery and move to clinical trials. And honestly, it was for me to answer the question, why it takes 12 years, why it costs that much. And the ambition was, if we can shorten the timeline down to 7 years, we literally could halven the cycle of innovation. If we can reduce the costs down to max 300 million, if we can make every research institute being able to afford running clinical trials and becoming pharmaceutical companies, and then we have more competition in the market, everyone wins, and especially patients. I truly believe that the reason why we haven't been able to cure diseases today is time. It's clinical trials. If we go faster, we test more, and we will definitely have a progress at a scale we haven't seen today. And yeah, so I have been working at AstraZeneca. And like my career in clinical trials started in the peak of the pandemic. It was the moment when everyone understood how important are clinical trials to save patients' life. We saw this with the vaccine. And working on that, I realized that now we have all those technology clinical solutions out there, literally a boom. One of the biggest issue within the pandemic was, because like clinical trial is testing drugs in patients. How a drug gets approved is basically you have access to all those data based on patient test drug. You take all those laboratory results, you assess the data, and then you compare to a control group. And then based on those data, you can show if your drug is efficient and safe. Pharmaceutical companies couldn't access those data because those data are in hospitals and often on paper. So most technologies in the space were all around building digital solutions that enable centralized data entry, that hospital staff enter the data in softwares and enabling pharmaceutical companies oversight over those data. And we see it like imaging software, just like, okay, so we can add scans. And like everything was in the space. And to me, it is definitely needed. But all technologies built today are built to fit within the traditional system that already existed. So we are not affecting the timeline in any ways. What we are doing for sure is increasing the cost because paper is still cheaper than software. And at the same time, my job was to deliver clinical trials to clinics. Because a clinical trial literally starts at clinics because the only person who can prescribe a clinical trial as a therapy line to patients are doctors, not pharmaceutical companies. So you need clinics to run clinical trials and to recruit patients for the clinical trial. My role was, once we have the go to run a clinical trial, to allocate the clinical trial to clinics and then help them start the clinical trial. And this process takes 18 to 24 months. And it has nothing to do with safety of patients. It has nothing to do with regulatory hurdles we have. It's clear process inefficiency. And if you add it across phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, you end up with 4.5 to 5 years of the total of 12 years are spent in the white spaces between the phases of clinical trials. And I'm like, we could literally improve the process of clinical trials delivery to clinics without changing anything else in the system and save 4 years. Why is no one working on it? And I decided to quit my job and work on it. That's the long story.
Amazing. That's an incredibly good run through, actually, of the value of clinical trial innovation. The way that you've just talked us all through that, you've explained the problem incredibly well. 12 years and $1 billion to get new drugs to patients. What was actually really interesting was when you said we don't do I think you said drug discovery or drug innovation anymore. We do drug updates. That's really interesting. You also pointed at a problem with incentives as well, which is that the drugs of highest priority of approval will be the ones that are focused on. And we can see that because of the volume that do get approved, and therefore the incentives aren't aligned to impact. I think this is just an interesting thing just to chat about here, because I think, on this podcast, there'll be a lot of people that understand health tech and perhaps less so pharma. But to understand pharma, I think, is to unlock a heck of a lot of innovation in the health tech system, because frankly, it's where the money is. And frankly, there's a lot that can be done if we can align incentives of pharma. And so it's interesting also to me how you essentially linked a pharma company to a hospital through clinical trials, which is that essentially there's all this valuable data locked up in hospitals on paper and in hospitals, and it's just inaccessible, but it's of extreme value to finding out what the most important drugs are, although algorithm is doing a lot of that, but crucially, the clinical trials that will enable those to get to market. And so there's a lot here to talk about in terms of the problem. And I guess where I want to start is this whole incentives thing about drug updates, drug discovery, and the drugs of highest probability. You've worked at AstraZeneca, you've worked in pharma, you're now doing this more broadly. I mean, how do we change that? Is that changeable? Is that changeable through policy? Is that changeable through any other incentives? Where does it have to change? Because ultimately I'm thinking, we can patch this and we can get incredibly driven people like yourself who really care about this stuff, and you can focus on trying to make that change further downstream. But ultimately, I'm just interested in your opinion here. Like, is that solvable as a real upstream problem? Because that would solve a lot, right?
Yes, 100%. on the one hand, I truly believe if I have a research budget of 100 billions per year, this is like across the whole global industry, there are only few drugs I can invest in. How can we get more? How can we increase the research and development productivity of those companies? We can do so by optimizing the system. And it's really interesting because working at pharma, I have seen they want to be faster. They suffer from, because there is the incentive that you have 20 years patent to make money from the drug you developed. Within those 20 years is the clinical trial timeline. So just like 12 years means you only have an 8 years window, just like for sales, like as a sales opportunity. There is this huge need and want to accelerate clinical trials. The only way we can do it is through use of technology. The issue we had at pharma till now is, first, most people working at pharma are scientists like me. We are not. I mean, like your whole career path teaches you to be an expert idiot that doesn't think, there is no extroverted thinking. You think you need to be an expert. And by that, it's really hard. And you believe in data. There is no experimentation. It has to be sure. And you add to it the burden of having like a phase 3 clinical trial. The ones I was running, like it's like 300 millions, like the burden of 300 millions, and you have to make it happen. And of course, you don't want to do any mistakes. How can you make sure you are not making any mistakes? It's just like doing it the way it has been done during the last 50, 60 years. And technologists, engineers, it's hard for an engineer to enter the market because you need to understand the industry. But to be part of the industry, you need a 10 years path to get in and truly understand it. So it has always been this separation of the technocrats on the one side and life science, like the worker on the other side. And by that it's one of those industries that has had a hard time being disrupted by technology. I mean, like it's like the word disrupted, really to profit from technology to improve. Literally, I sat in meetings and you try new technologies and the outcome is zero. During the pandemic, there was this rise of digital health solutions. Pharmaceutical companies invested tons of money in those digital solutions, and most of them proved to be not worth the money invested, which led again to the skepticism towards health solutions. So to me, can we change the incentives? On the one hand, is to truly understand the pain point of your customer, and do we want to invest in more drugs? If this is my mission, then how can I enable pharmaceutical companies to accelerate clinical trials to get the drug faster to the market so that there is more incentive for innovation. Now we can take more risk because you have more time to make money out of your blockbusters. And so this is on the one hand. The other thing is we have never thought about building an infrastructure for biotech companies. So biotech companies today, a great example is the collaboration between BioNTech and Pfizer. You have a biotech company that has been investing in a technology for a decade at least. They run a phase 1 trial, and then you can't afford running a phase 2 or phase 3 trial. You have to collaborate with a big pharmaceutical company, partner, or gain acquired, because this is literally the finish line. And there is not much work in how can we actually enable newcomers because they are bold. So for them, the incentives is I want my drug to be the best because this is the only way I can be successful in the market. But for them, there are no solutions. And so what I say is we need to build this clinical research infrastructure to enable biotech companies to play the clinical trial game that only pharma can play today. And and the other thing about updates, it's ridiculous that regulations require the same clinical trial regulatory requirements for drug updates as for new therapeutics. I truly believe if we just change, if we just change a type of receptor, if we just we improve the affinity, we need a different clinical trial system to prove. Because, why would we have to run a phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trial to prove that the drug is safe? We already determined the safety profile. There must be another way. And I believe in the future it will be, definitely. It's just a matter of time.
I think that's really interesting. I think what you're saying is, if I've understood this correctly, is that because of the inefficiencies of the R&D and clinical trials process, that R&D budget has to go to the drugs that have the highest probability of approval. And that by creating more efficiencies in that entire process, given the sums of money involved here, that marginal gains actually produces, well, quite a lot in real terms. I think what you're saying is that by improving that efficiency, those companies are then more likely to spread their bets further than that beyond the drugs necessarily just of highest approval. They're more likely to take a punt on the ones of highest impact because actually they're going to have a greater risk appetite because of the fact that, relatively speaking, they have more resource, which I think that's fascinating because it's funny that I'm sure there's people listening who might be judging pharma companies for that. And I think, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I think that said, though, imagine if you as an individual had 10 grand to invest, would you invest in what was likely to give you the highest return, or would you invest in what's likely to give you highest impact, even though it might fail and deliver no impact? So do you want the guaranteed return that delivers some impact, or do you want the risk that might deliver no impact or loads? Now, that's a hard decision. And I think morality can be applied to an individual, I think, quite easily. You can judge an individual and their morality a lot easier than perhaps. I was actually having this conversation a while ago with some of my family that I think, and this is dodgy territory I'm on now, but I'm with friends, I feel, but I think there's an expectation of individuals to apply morality sometimes. Or sorry, that's not an expectation. Individuals sometimes express or expect morality from an organization the size of a pharma company, and they will sort of project human values onto decisions made by an entity as large as a pharma company that has tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees. And I think ultimately they're just going to make the decision for what's profitable for their shareholders, because that's just how companies are run, and that is capitalism. And I think to expect morality and the nuance that comes along with that is very difficult. And so I think there's a pragmatism and a practicality with going, okay, well, if their incentive is money, and it's currently incredibly high risk to optimize for impact. Well, how do we de-risk that? Well, actually, let's make the system incredibly efficient so that they're almost guaranteed those drug updates. And we can do that by helping with clinical trial efficiency. And we can also do that by setting up a different system to just make those drug updates incredibly simple and much easier, because we know the drug is safe and therefore it doesn't need that. Then we give them a lot more money to play with. Then, like any individual's portfolio, I suppose, at the high net worth level or ultra high net worth level, they will of course throw more money into a high risk asset class. They might become an LP into a VC fund. They might do all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. And actually that's helped me clarify that in my mind, I think, a little bit. And I might have a lot of blind spots there. But the other thing that you talked about was infrastructure as well. Explain that point to me again. A bit more, perhaps.
Yes. When we talk about clinical trials, and this is something like we always think about the clinical trial provider. The clinical trial provider is often pharmaceutical company or biotech company. But if you have a clinical trial, it's a huge non-digitalized platform. It's really just like a market. You have the clinical trial provider. This is this institutions who has this therapy, and then they make the design of the clinical trial, and then they are required by regulatories to have the oversight and ensure patient safety and collect the right data and so on. You have facilities. Facilities are the clinics where patients is welcomed, where the treatments happen, where the data capture happens. You have and drug logistics, the companies that develop the drug that ship it to all those clinics around the globe. You have all clinical solutions. Those are software companies that helps you capture all those data. You have laboratories. Like if you have as an example, if you have a cancer, a clinical trial in cancer, usually most drugs have tons of side effects. Then you are not only working with the women cancer clinic where the patient is received and where all the treatments happen. You are working also with radiology where we do all the CTs to monitor tumor progress. We work with pathology to assess the type of tumors. We work with cardiologists to monitor side effects, ophthalmologists. It's just like, it's a huge network of people that work together and institutions that work together. And so it requires a lot of coordination between people within, like, imagine within pharma, you have a clinical trial. It's multinational in at least 20 countries. So you have 20 teams working on the same clinical trial. And those 20 teams, every single team coordinate the communication with all those facilities in the country. And it's a huge network of coordination. And it's full of silos. Like the way today's way of coordinating a clinical operation, a clinical trial, is phone calls, emails, Excel sheets, and PowerPoint presentations. That we have this huge, that the clinical operation is really complex. Even though the clinical trial is owned by biotech or pharmaceutical companies, we have all those organizations around that actually are required to work together. And today we have this huge complex organization that operates offline, and every individual involved plays a single game player. And what you end up with is we have collaboration with huge stakeholder isolation, because everyone is a tiny island. And with that, we have all the efficiencies we gathered over the years. And so to me, honestly, when I started, it was more why we have two clinical trial teams, like why we have two clinical trials happening in the same clinic, and the two teams do not know about each other, which means we have the same processes happening twice in parallel. And then you add to it how many processes are happening asynchronously, but are so identical. And you multiply this in the thousands over the years and the costs that requires. And so this is, and to me it was like this, we have this infrastructure that is offline, and because it's offline, no one ever really bothered about mapping this infrastructure and making everyone in clinical trial team, like just like literally giving them the overview about what's happening. We generated all those inefficiencies that take us those 12 years. Because like honestly, for me, it was, I have this amazing drug. It is like literally AstraZeneca's current portfolio for breast cancer, such a delight to work on it. And there's this new drug that's supposed to replace chemotherapy for patients in triple negative breast cancer patients. And triple negative breast cancer patients, if they are stage 4, usually you have 11.5 months to live. That's the stats for them. And we call them triple negative because they are negative to all biomarkers we know that we can target with current drugs that are in the market. We have phase 1 data, amazing data, and it took us more than 1 year to organize the delivery of the start of the clinical trial so patients can have access to this clinical trial and to this therapy. Those are patients that are literally desperate for a therapy that phase 1 trials showed that 37% of those patients in phase 1 have been like a huge benefit, really amazing data where, I mean, it has been presented in the ASCO, in different cancer oncology conferences, and the medical community celebrating the results as a breakthrough. And then we have this breakthrough in our hands, and we struggle to deliver it to patients in need. And you just get exposed to those inefficiencies and truly understanding what it means for the patient life. And to me, it was I can't see myself playing the traditional game long term and climb the career ladder, knowing that it's actually damaging everyone. If you think about it, 70% of the global death rate is from non-communicative diseases, and non-communicative diseases are diseases that are not aging related and not infection related. Just like if you think about it, 70%, those are around 50 million people per year. In 20 years, 1 billion people die of diseases that actually we could cure. But definitely not if it takes us that long to develop drugs and to deliver those drugs to the patients, and we have the wrong incentives. So for me, it was, okay, all I care about, and I used to tell my boss, all I care about, if I have a breakthrough innovation in my hand, it's our ethical responsibility to deliver it to patients as soon as possible. And pharma want that, because if you have a breakthrough innovation, it's going to make you tons of money. You want to deliver it as soon as possible to patients. And there is just a lack of infrastructure that enable the speed. And when I started, everyone is like, never mention the word speed because it's seen as a bad thing. People will distrust you if you talk about speed, because speed means you are willing to risk patient safety and break the regulatory rules to get to your means. I'm like, no, we need speed. It's our ethical responsibility. It's like, we have to be advocate for speed if we truly want to impact the world and just like really improve health at a global scale. So for me, it was the way we look at clinical trial teams. We only look within the operation. Can we enable the team? And for me, the team is everyone involved, no matter in which organization they work, to work together. And without phone calls, without emails. I mean, the way we have all those collaboration tools, if you have this dashboard and you work with everyone, you don't even have to tell someone, what are you doing? You go there, like if you use Figma or Miroboard or whatever, you know what the rest of your team is doing.
Yeah.
We hire people and we let them spend the whole day sending emails, asking for follow-up questions, while they could just spend this time doing the work instead of talking about the work that needs to be done. 70% of the time of every single employee in clinical research is looking at Excel sheets, tracking Excel sheets, writing emails, waiting for a reply, picking up the phone call. And that's literally the reason why we have the progress we have today in health.
Yeah.
And so, and this is like, so for me, it was like, we need to rethink the way those organizations collaborate. And of course, here it's really hard for someone coming from the technology space to build something in the clinical research space, because how would you know how the process is? How would you know all the regulations around it? How would you know? Yeah. And, but I'm really excited. I feel our generation, even though we are coming from the science space, we grew up with technology. So we become all technology natives. So if something is inefficient, even at work, you realize, oh, we can do this differently. Why does this doesn't work? Like, why do I have to, it's like we always make, this could be like Uber, or this could be like Spotify, or this could be like Amazon. Why it's not working? And, yeah. So, and that's what I mean. Is like the biggest issue we have today is infrastructure. So we know that clinical trials start at clinics. Clinical trials happen at clinics. Everyone talks about, there is a huge issue around patient recruitment, that the biggest bottleneck in clinical trials is patient recruitment, because only 8% of patients across the globe are part of clinical trials. Therefore, we have to invest in patient recruitment. And I'm like, we don't have a patient recruitment problem, because only 3% of doctors are part of clinical trials. Actually, we have a good quota, taking into consideration that we are not really raising awareness around clinical trials at clinic sites. So that's why, so for me, is we really have to improve the experience between the coordination between the pharma and clinics, to really be able to accelerate clinical trials delivery.
It's very clear just how much you care about this problem. I mean, your ability to sell the vision and what you want to achieve is incredible. I mean, second to none, I'd argue. And this is something that you clearly care about. I think that's such a wonderful foundation for starting a company in an area that is not easy. Plenty of competitors, plenty of difficult regulations, as you've said, difficulties left, right, and centre to actually getting this done because of, how it's always been, in inverted commas. Like it's
Yes.
There's a lot that you're going up against innovating in a space that hasn't had or seen much in the way of innovation as we would expect, to your point about being technology natives. And so I'm interested now in Yendou and the company that you've built or are building. And yeah, whereabouts are you with it? What is it? What's the product? How does it help all these problems that you've talked about? And talk to me about some of your early experiences in this new entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, so Yendou is a clinical operation tool that enables collaboration between pharmaceutical companies, clinics, and clinicians to accelerate clinical trials delivery to clinics, so patients can receive new drugs as soon as possible. The goal is to shorten the clinical trial delivery timeline. We call it clinical trial startup phase, from 18 months to 6 months. Within the next 2 years, this is the goal we are working on. And as I mentioned, for us, so what we do, as mentioned, we have stakeholder isolations. There is no cross-stakeholder collaboration. And with Yendou, we change this. We are totally obsessed about redefining what our clinical trial team means, and build a collaboration tools that enable cross-organizational collaboration. So how can we get people who work in different institutions to work together? Today, if there is a clinical trial, so for example, at Yendou, what is possible, pharmaceutical company can literally, within few clicks, it won't take them even more than 5 minutes, add their clinical trial to the platform and share it with all key opinion leaders and oncology experts across the globe. We enable physicians to give feedback to the clinical trial in real time. If you are the medical lead of a clinical trial, you can assess all feedback and directly connect with the oncologist and request more information, or like a video call to to further assess how this can help you to improve the clinical trial protocol. We enable, so like also what can be done is like you have clinical research associates at pharma that can access all essential documents needed for regulatory at clinic level and just download them with one click. We enable, like if you are the clinical lead of the clinical trial, you have oversight and reporting about everything. You can export all data. But what we also do is, and something that was very important to me, is building a solution that really decrease the administrative burden around clinical trials for clinics too. So clinics, whenever they are interested in being part of a clinical trial, they have to submit the same documents again and again. Most of them are in PDF. Now they all have access to their own profile, and then they have access to data insights, and then they can so every personnel within the clinic, they have their own profile. They can manage their own data. Clinic directors, they have access to the whole clinical trial portfolio of different departments. Sometimes we talk to clinic directors, and most hospitals, they actually surviving from grants and research money. And whenever they are planning the next quarter, they have to call every single department asking what are the clinical trials that are upcoming. Now they don't need to do this. They have their own profile. They go there and they see all clinical trials activities happening across departments in the hospital. So that's what Yendou is today. What we do is just like trying to change the way of work without really disrupting the dynamic those stakeholders have with each other. So just like, can we map the infrastructure and the structure of those stakeholders to display the reality, even though, and at the same time, innovating on the tools used to get access to the same information.
It's a simple concept, isn't it? I mean, it's almost like why doesn't it exist en masse currently? And it looks very familiar, I think, in the way that people of our generation, I suppose, that are on quite a lot of tech platforms like Slack or Figma or Miro or all these different things, like you have this expectation of how things look and feel that you're already, Apple and Google and Facebook have trained us incredibly well on certain interfaces, haven't they? And like, we just know how to use certain things. And so it fits into that, because looking at it on your website now, just looking at the screenshots and things like that, like there's a real familiarity to it and a real simplicity to it. And I can see your point of like, it makes a lot of sense, like addressing this, cross-site collaboration or addressing all these different sites, but just getting people onto the same platform. Like even earlier today, like you'll relate to this in terms of running a new business. Like, all of a sudden you're an accountant overnight and you have to do a lot of accounting and all that sort of stuff, and having to go on Xero and like linking our accountants and me and people and putting people as expenses and this and that, the other. All of a sudden, like, thinking how that would be possible without a platform like Xero is now unthinkable. But I suppose that's where pharma is currently. It's like you've got all these people that have to submit expenses. They're probably sending receipts in in an envelope via the post to a human. The human is looking at it and then just ticking a box on a piece of paper. The piece of paper is then scanned into a computer. And then Xero comes along and then just automates the whole lot. And, other accountancy platforms are available, I'm sure. But you know what I mean, right? This has that feel to it of like, there's the things that you need that brings everybody together. And seemingly, I imagine when this stuff is ubiquitously everywhere, and it would be like, how did we exist without this stuff,
Yeah. The challenges are more around, building a platform, and it's actually really interesting. In 2 weeks, the screens will be looking completely different. We have been doing a lot of work, and I'm very excited about what's coming up soon.
Nice.
Like the biggest challenge is really that you have different stakeholders with different incentives. Like you with your accountant, you have the same incentives. And
which is to keep me out of jail.
Yes, exactly. That's what My accountant and me, we agree on this too. Yeah. And like here you have to understand. So talking about morality, why? So pharmaceutical companies use clinics and as service providers for patients recruitment. They're in clinical trials, and we obviously have a huge problem that over a third of those clinics recruit 0 patients. We spend millions to activate those clinics on like 2-digit millions and end up with 0 output. And then you have to close those clinics, which is another budget to it. And all we do is how can we really help? Like all I care about is making amazing therapeutic reach patients as soon as possible. So we need to understand the incentives. It's literally like I wake up every morning and then I go to the gym, and sometimes I'm like running on the treadmill and thinking, what do they want? What do they want? It's like the whole time, how can I build a platform that's actually a response to the incentives of different parties? And for that, you have to talk to oncologists and understand why you pick this clinical trial, why you end up recruiting 0 patients in this clinical trial, what needs to be done differently. And it's like, how can you engage those people to perform? Because they don't have to perform. And, like, how can we tackle those challenges as early as possible? It's like, so it's not only process innovation in a sense. We want to streamline the process and enable collaboration. How can we make the parties collaborating align on incentives? And so that's really where the challenge is, because pharmaceutical companies suffer greatly from low performance. And for them, low performance is it takes too long to recruit patients. And sometimes it's a really heartbreaking knowing that it's literally sometimes you have a highly innovative drug and I cannot understand why why we have issues with recruitment, but we do have them. And it's because politics, personal agendas. So a lot of work what we do is really depicting those personal agendas, or why would this oncologist not refer their patients to a clinical trial? And understand there is a price tag. And now again, morality. It's actually funny because we expect morality from pharma. Pharma expects morality from physicians. And they're like, we have this amazing drug. We expect you knowing the data that you would recommend your patient to this clinical trial. But the physician says, if I recommend this patient to the clinical trial, my income is gone because I am not part of this clinical trial. So what, and then, and that's truly, literally the challenge it's more aligning incentives to really understand. Yeah, like we are trying to get people to work together that actually dislike working together and they do it just because they have to. And that's how everyone profits from each other. It has never been a relationship based on we like each other. We're just like, we got to work together because that's how everyone gets what they want. And,
I think what's interesting there is I think you very neatly explained there that, I mean, this is not just a tech platform, is it? This is not what a business in this sphere is built on. A business in this sphere is built on an incredibly deep understanding of everybody involved, what their incentives are, and appreciating that in order to get this solution to market and executing incredibly well, it's as much about behavior change and just understanding different people and how they work together, and just that transformation adoption piece as much as anything else. In fact, probably more so, because I'm sure plenty of platforms have come and gone, and I'm sure you know who they are, that have tried to do something similar. But it seems that the success of this is really hung on something much deeper and greater, which is that appreciation and understanding, and I suppose, and the ability to find what that middle ground is, and to create a system in which your platform sits, where everybody is aligned eventually. Not an easy task.
Yeah, I truly like I would say the leverage we have compares to others who came before us, and maybe many who will come after us, is that while during my time at pharma, I have been a huge advocate for clinic centricity. That we have to the end. And there were back then there were a lot of people who would say like, you can't be it's usually we don't talk about those who you just, okay, you could risk your job, you could be, yeah. And I have always been advocate for that because I truly believe, we need them. Because, if you think about it, if I am a cancer patient and my oncologist tells me usually you are informed about the diagnosis, and which is like, you are in shock, and your oncologist will be like, okay, that's how we will start the therapy. And you will do whatever they tell you. It's never that their patients go to that you receive the diagnosis and you're like, yes, but I have seen this ad about this clinical trial. Do you think I should do this therapy? I'm like, no, I have no idea. You are the oncologist. I want to live. That's all what I want. And then I will do whatever you tell me to ensure. Yeah. And it's also like a huge responsibility to make therapy choice on the patient's shoulders. I don't want my therapy to fail and then be the one responsible because I choose the wrong therapy, and then, being gone, and then it's like, and the suffering around you. So for me, it was always clear. I feel like a lot of digital health solutions try to replace doctors and get directly to the patients. I'm like, no, it's actually when we are sick, we are in such a vulnerable position. We want to delegate this. We want people to take care of us. I was like, I want to go to the doctors. He tells me what's wrong with me and tells me what I should do to feel better again. And we never, as a patient, we never wanted to get rid of our doctors. We just want to have a better experience with them. We want them actually to give us more time. We want them to give us the feeling that they care, but we never, and to me, it was what I heavily criticized around patient centricity. And I know it's like some people see it as provocative when I say patient centricity is the wrong path. It's more fun noise and distraction from what we should care about. We should actually offer physicians a better experience to enable them to have more time for patients. And and I think that's the leverage we have, that many oncologists in the space, they knew me as someone who always cared a lot. And I think if you have been to clinics, which I have been a lot, if you talk to them, like literally I would go there and I would I still remember my first trip to the clinic and excited about this new technology that now they can work on their iPads and they no longer need paper. And then I have the nurse telling me, honestly, I wish we can go back to paper. And of course I am shocked because this is innovation. This is the future. And then you understand that before that they had one single folder with all patient data in one place. Now every single patient data needs to be entered in a different web application with different access, email and password. That's a nightmare. And the nurse time, it's counted based on the patient's visits she received every day. And the time for data entry is not calculated in their 40 hours work week. And we never considered that. And when you see them and how many go to burnout, and then they talk to you about how hard it is, how overwhelmed they are, and then I just want to upload this ECG to this application. It's not working. And I have to call now the customer support. It was never their job to call the customer support. It's like, and there's like having the empathy to understand that the new solutions we offer, most clinic staffs are just horrible experiences. And honestly, with my team, I am just on Monday, I had this call with them and I'm like, I know we love fancy technology and tech stack. The fancy tech stack is for you. What the user see is the user interface. I don't care. Today, the priority will be to work on improving the user interface. I don't want any of our users, especially at the clinic. I'm more tolerant at the pharma side than at the clinic side, because those people spend the whole day under just like, how their work day look like. It's like there's zero tolerance for me to offer them a bad experience. So it has always been, what is the value I can offer clinics? So, and make their life easier. And I think, and having the patience I think we are in a rush. And what I admire a lot about Facebook or Google is build a technology that makes the non-paying user's life great. Can you imagine this dedication? And this dedication, we don't have it today. I want to build a great software for those who pays me at the detriment of the end users that don't pay for the usage. While in clinical research, of course, pharmaceutical companies are the ones the payers, but your end users are not the procurement center. And the problem also, they never use your software. They don't know how horrible it is. All they see is someone at the clinic side is having a hard time using it, but they don't care, because we already paid the annual subscription. Now everyone has to deal with it. We're not going to change the vendor.
Yeah, I think it's very obvious and it's very clear that what you bring to this is your understanding of everybody involved. I think that you're right, that obsession about the user friendliness of it to the people who matter is important. And it's defining the people that matter, isn't it? Because there's as you say, there's the paying customer, but then there's the user. And it lives or dies on whether the users use it and whether they use it correctly as well, which is another reason that the interface needs to be excellent. Yeah. And so I think it's been fascinating talking to you, because obviously I've seen your content on LinkedIn and you come across as passionate on LinkedIn. It's 10 times that when you're at the end of a microphone, which is awesome. It's really inspiring. But I think it's also comforting to know that there's people like yourself that not only have the passion, because in some way, when people have their awakening, be that in a pharma company or be that anywhere or politically or whatever, you can have this awakening and you can get mad at the system. That's easy. I think that's easy to do. I think that's relatively common for people to rise up against the machine at some point and be angry about something and turn that into a passion. I think that's relatively common. But then to have the, I suppose, maturity / wisdom to then do the learning of what is practically possible to change this, that is special. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, which is that you've got that wisdom and understanding of all these different sides of this, and you have a vision for how this might practically work. And it's not just about building a tech platform. It's about building it in the right way for the right people and having a consistent understanding of how those people use it and the feedback loops, and to constantly iterate and to constantly make it better, because otherwise you can plot the way through with some incentives on paper, logically, but then practically in real world is again very different. And it seems like you're very connected into all of that, which is awesome. But yeah, Zina, it's been a pleasure. And to learn about Yendou and what you're doing, I think it's great. As I say, it looks great. It's going to look even better in a couple of weeks by the sounds of things. But I think the real value here is it's where this is where this sits in the grand scheme of things, and the company that you're building being more than just the product, the understanding that you have being so much more of the value of how this is going to actually work practically. So I think it's an incredible idea. And if we can go some way to reducing that billion to 300 million, reducing the 12 years to 7 years, halving the innovation cycle, all these things that you've mentioned, and then let's hope it gives those R&D departments or gives whoever's over that R&D budget the license to then not only back the drugs with the highest probability of approval, but back the drugs, with the highest probability of impact.
If it costs only 300 million, now you have VCs backing biotech companies, And in Series B, Series C, you can actually run your own clinical trial.
Yeah.
And just like, it's not only that we speed up 2x by halving the timeline, you expand the pool of players. And that's where you get your 100x. That's actually where I always, like, when I tell my team, let's build this, and then it's game time.
Nice. Well, Zina, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more about Yendou, or they want to learn more about you, or to get in touch, what's the best way for them to learn more or get in touch with you?
If they want to get in touch with me over LinkedIn, Zina Sarif, just PM me, and I am responsive. Sometimes it takes a few days, but I promise I will get back to you. And if you want to learn more about Yendou, yes, you can just go to yendou.io and request access or just book a meeting, and then we can talk about Yendou more.
Amazing. Thanks so much for joining us.